Hello, everyone. Nearly knocked that down. I had some good feedback in regards to this sort of format, so I thought I'll do another video on it. Like it. I'm not good at this. I'm trying though. I'm trying. So, like the previous one, this topic was also sparked by a conversation which I had with a fellow coach. So, if you're an athlete, then this might not be appropriate to you. You might not really be too interested. However, if you're a coach or someone who tries to improve another individual on a regular basis, then this might be something that you might find interesting. I'm just trying to add some value to, some content and some value to the channel and see what people find interesting. This is something that I particularly find interesting, so I thought I'd share with you a little bit of what I've studied before and what I know in regards to coaching and feedback to improve skill acquisition and enhance performance. So first of all, let's just take a look at some definitions here. So what is feedback? It just serves as a basis for correction of errors and guides the performance to the correct movement. Okay, so that's all we're trying to do there. Then motor skills are activities or tasks which require voluntary control over movement of the joints and body segments to achieve a specific goal. And then motor learning is a set of processes associated with practice or experience leading to relatively permanent changes in the capability for movement. Neurological changes that occur as a person learns a motor skill and variables which influence those changes. So when we talk about feedback, then we can use it for several things like improve someone's knowledge, provide information, reinforcement, punishment, encouragement, and motivation. But for this video, I'm going to talk about skill acquisition particularly. So just the things that you can say and the methods that you can use to actually increase the skill acquisition or improve a specific skill or a movement. So there's different methods of delivering feedback. So you've got visual, which is showing someone how to do something. You've got auditory, which could be listening out for foot contacts. If you're jumping, for example, or you want to land softly or you want to land loud. Then you've got tactile, which could be physically putting someone in the right position when appropriate. Then you've got verbal, which is the one I'm going to be speaking about specifically, which is actually telling someone how to do something. So let's take a look at, so I'm going to talk mainly about, I work primarily with youth athletes, so I'm going to talk about youth athletes specifically, but if you work with adults, then this might also be of interest to you, but it's important to contextualize the differences. So let's take a look at these differences. So children and athletes have different information processing capabilities, okay? And these differences are cognitive processes, such as selective attention, differences in speed of information processing, which then increases with age. And children also utilize different processing of information in specific tasks. And tasks which require visuospatial working memory, object recognition memory, verbal learning, copying spatial patterns, and requiring higher level of attention focus. So these differences in cognitive ability may contribute to motor learning differences between both children and athletes and adults. So explicit versus implicit information or feedback. So when we talk about explicit feedback, we're talking about telling someone how to perform a specific movement. And you're actually describing the movement and you're providing rules as how to perform the exercise. This is known as declarative knowledge. So meaning that the athlete will learn more at a conscious level and will be able to describe the technical model. However, when you do it this way, when you use explicit feedback, the athlete may become dependent and overthink the movement. So it's not always good. So how do we counteract that? Well, you can use implicit feedback. Implicit is when you're not exactly telling them how to perform the movement, and this usually occurs more of at an unconscious level. It's kind of like learning how to ride a bike. You learn how to ride a bike; it's more at an unconscious level, and this way may actually be more useful under pressure or stressful conditions. So when you think about sport, you can start to rationalize why you'd probably use more of an implicit feedback method, because oftentimes it's stressful and you don't have time to think things through. So this is a good skill to develop. So this can be done through the use of analogies, for example. So when you're using analogies, so this is just a study which looked at explicit versus analogy conditions. And all I'm trying to do with this specific study is show you the amount of time you can save just through the use of analogies. So instead of describing the whole technical model, you could just give an analogy, and then you're not telling the athlete exactly what to do, but they get an idea and they may actually perform better than when you're actually telling them what to do step by step. So in this study here, they were trying to improve basketball shooting or hooping performance. And in the explicit, you can see there in the image, like the whole technical model that they ran through. And then in the analogy, they just said, shoot the ball as if you're trying to cook for a cookie jar on a high shelf. And guess who did better? No surprise. Okay, the analogy group did better. In regards to the actual research, you could argue scientists out there in terms of the methodology, but we won't go into that too much. However, in this next paper, they were instructing children how to perform skipping rope. Okay, and they looked at two different ways. So analogy again, and then explicit. So with the explicit, they said jump with both feet on the same spot, and then jump like a rabbit. And again, guess which group did better at jumping and learned the skill better? The jump like a rabbit group. Now, we also have, which links back to that previous study, focus of attention. So where do you direct the focus? Is it better to direct the focus to someone's own body? Or is it better to direct the focus to something external? And this is also known as internal and external cueing. So internal, as I said, is focusing the attention to someone's own body during a task. External is focusing on the goal or an outcome or something outside of that. So I'll give you an example. I was coaching at a pool, and just for context, we're coaching dives, and the blocks, behind the building, there was a car park. And I got the athletes were jumping off the blocks. And in the first time I said with the internal cue, and I said, explode through the hips. And the second time round, I said, push the blocks into the car park. And it was amazing, the difference between the intent. Now, what I was trying to tell him is essentially the same thing. Okay, rapid hip extension, rapid triple extension was what I was trying to get at. But they don't necessarily, that's not really how it works. The athletes need to be able to associate with something, which then in turn will increase the intent. And so that works really well. And there's lots of other research which highlights this. So if you want, I've got all the research here and I can send it across. Then you've got intrinsic versus augmented feedback. So intrinsic is information provided as a natural consequence of an action coming from the body's internal sensory receptors, and it's readily available information and can be increased by tools such as like mirrors or a dial. So it's something that the athletes already kind of know. Augmented feedback, this is the one where we need to be most conscious of, and it's going to serve us with the most value as coaches, is augmented feedback. And it means feedback that comes from an external or supplementary source. So typically a coach. And it enriches natural occurring intrinsic feedback. So it makes the athlete more aware. Then we also have two types of augmented feedback. So you've got knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. Now, knowledge of results is, for example, you're showing the athlete the result. So you're showing them, oh, you've got a new PB. This is how much you lifted. Knowledge of performance is you're providing information on the quality of the movement independent of the goal or outcome, and it's mainly technical. Okay, and this is the one that we want to be focusing on the most when it comes to skill acquisition. Providing instant feedback, instant knowledge of results can actually be detrimental to learning, according to some retention tests that we've done. Now, retention is really important. Okay, if you get good at something and then you come back later, you're no good, or 2 days later you can't remember, you're no good, then that's useless. you need to be aware and be able to retain that information. This is due to knowledge of results being readily available, which then eliminates any self-evaluation processes from the participant, which is why also like asking questions is actually quite good. Let's take a look at some types of augmented feedback strategies then, which we can use. So frequency so when it comes to frequency, increased retention is better when there's less feedback. Okay, so providing too much feedback can be detrimental in regards to retention. Providing feedback each trial may facilitate the planning for the next response, but it reduces the participants' need to carry out memory retrieval operations, which are crucial for learning. Okay, then you've got bandwidth, which is providing feedback after a set amount of errors which are performed. So you may say, okay, there's a certain error there. Okay, I'll kind of let that go. Okay, you have a set amount of errors before you then intervene. Then you have, so you kind of like have like a bandwidth of where if they deviate from the technical model, which is what I tend to do quite a lot, instead of intervening so much, because if you intervene too much, then they can have negative impact on retention. So you kind of have like a bandwidth, which you address the important things first. And if they deviate too much away from the technical model, then you jump in. So like teaching a hinge, if they're bending the knee a little bit too much than what you'd want, then you may not intervene directly. But if then they arching their back, then you may need to intervene. Okay, you've got summary and average. So that's when the feedback is given after a set rather than every single repetition. Okay, which is better for retention when you compare it to each rep. Then you've got delayed, which is waiting for a period of time and then providing the athlete with some feedback. And this is shown to actually increase retention. Okay, which, as we said, feedback given immediately or concurrently blocks the processing of other important types of information. Okay, for example, intrinsic feedback, which we've just spoken about. So that's really important to be aware of. Then you've got estimations, which is what I was speaking about a minute ago, which is where coaches may ask questions to the athletes and find out what they thought about the movement. Okay, trying to again increase and get the athlete to use their intrinsic mechanisms to understand the movement and how to correct it. So these are some strategies that you can use, and it's really useful to know, like in terms of what sticks with them and what doesn't in regards to retention. Now let's take a look as well when to give feedback. So what's better, concurrent or terminal? So I just touched on it a little bit then. So feedback during the movement might distract the athlete from intrinsic feedback of the movement. So if you're always giving feedback, then the athlete is not actually thinking for themselves and actually feeling the movement and learning it, knowing what doing it well feels like, doing it wrong feels like. If you're correcting all the time, then they're not going to be able to get that intrinsic feedback themselves. Instant feedback, again, right after the movement may have a similar effect as the concurrent feedback for similar reasons. And delayed feedback is actually what appears to be more effective, even just for a few seconds, according to the research. Then you've got precision of feedback. So how precise should the feedback be? So for beginners, specific, the feedback should be specific, but it doesn't need to be as precise. Okay? For experts, it needs to be more precise as they're more aware of the technical model. So we can begin to focus on little details as much. So for example, I'll give you an example. When you're doing a hinge, with a beginner, we want to be specific in the sense that, okay, we want them to keep a neutral spine, but we may not talk about the torso angle. With the more experienced ones, we may say, okay, neutral spine, torso angle needs to be at this sort of degree, you need to have your hands here. This is where you need to have your, and so on. Okay, so it's more precise. And you need to think about is will the athlete understand the feedback first of all? So what is your terminology? Will they understand it? Is the feedback useful, or is it just white noise? And do you provide feedback about the error, or do you provide feedback as to how to correct the error? And what are the pros and cons of both? So this is something to think about. How much feedback should we give? So research has shown that reduced feedback has been shown to improve motor learning in adults. Okay. But also, this has been investigated in children and adults as well, finding that adults improve in practice and retention of skill with reduced feedback. Children did not improve in the practice, but did improve retention with reduced feedback when compared to 100% feedback. So what this means is that children, when you reduce feedback, they may not improve straight away in the session, but when it comes to retention and remembering, when they then return at a later date, their retention is actually a lot better when you say less. Okay, and this is very powerful, very important to be aware of and have an awareness of this. Because information processing and memory capabilities of the learner are limited. There's only so much they can remember. So prioritize what you want them to know. So limit the amount, the corrections that should be made with each trial. And choose, again, like I said, choose the error. Like when you're hinging, address a neutral spine before you're addressing anything else. Because if not, the athlete, this is called the guidance hypothesis, which is where the athlete will become over-reliant and will not be able to correct it themselves. Okay, and this is particularly important when we're considering long-term athletic development. We want them to be able to do things for themselves, because you're not going to be with them the whole time. And they typically change coaches, especially if they're going through like academy settings. They'll change coaches. Okay, so it's important that we understand these things. So the takeaway message is the way a message is delivered is just as important as the actual message. The use of augmented feedback and external cues should be used when possible. Retention is the main thing here, is key. And it's also crucial for strength conditioning coaches, but just coaches in general, to understand motor learning best practices and then apply them in the correct context also. Then I've just got obviously all the research here. If anyone wants to look through it, then I'm more than happy to send it across. Cheers, guys. Hope that was helpful again. Just trying to stimulate some conversation. If you got any questions, or if you want to chat or disagree with something, got anything to add, then please feel free to send me a message. I'm always wanting to learn a little bit more. So, yeah. Cheers. See you in the next one.